and thank you very much for inviting me and Alexandra to reflect on this very challenging topic for the European context as well, for the global context as well. And why not, if you are just going to discuss on a very a narrow way related to what's happening in micro-credentials, I'm sure that it is not enough. We should open a very broad perspective on micro-credentials, which is, of course, focusing on the European affairs, as so called, but just try to launch something in a very huge way, a new diplomacy, educational diplomacy, which is just crossing the borders worldwide. It's very important. And one important ambassador in this context could be micro-credentials. That's very interesting. In my personal view, in this moment, micro-credentials, in this new diplomacy, academic diplomacy, trans-border one, transcontinental one, micro-credentials could become a very important ambassador for reorganizing curricula, reoffering new learning experiences, and recreating a huge interest for different category of students, traditional students and non-traditional students.
Well, thank you very much for being here and for having us. Uh, it's clear that for us in the alliances, it's micro credentials are really important. So, well, we're fostering them, we're developing them, and we see the transformation across several years now. So it's clearly interesting for us to talk about them and to share these practices with others. And this is why we're happy to be here and now with the new edition of the sports as well.
Thank you very much. That's perfect. I'm starting now just mentioning that this is a very um, topic very close to my heart. I'm so happy to share insights that can benefit higher education worldwide. As I mentioned previously, me personally, I'm very much confident in the idea of diplomacy, academic diplomacy, educational diplomacy, soft diplomacy, which could be, of course, extensively linked with the the global perspective. And it's a pleasure to share some of my fantastic developments happening in Europe with our colleagues in Latin America. And we believe that the European experience with micro-credentials can offer valuable lessons and inspiration for the global higher education community. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I mean, Professor, you of course mentioned the role of the diplomacy, and we are talking about the context which for our colleagues in Latin America University may be very exotic, maybe the context of European University alliances, and we know from the previous editions that they have regarded these alliances as something quite interesting for them beyond, of course, the cooperation in international education as a whole. So, when taking your note on the educational diplomacy and the topic of micro-credential as a new ambassador, maybe also among many others, now maybe it would be interesting to also elaborate a bit on the alliances and what are they actually to share with the colleagues and what maybe how are they regarded in this broader context of European educational. Well, you mentioned academic diplomacy now, and how maybe they could play a role in the micro-credential development.
Yes, Alex, with pleasure. We are always being from 5 or 6 years deeply involved in this new reality, which is characterizing the new context of higher education in European countries and the European continent. And after 2017, we have been in a new era, a era which is dedicated to European university alliances, like a strategic partnership among universities across Europe, which are starting to work collaboratively, and they are just purposing to create a more integrated and innovative European education area. And until now, we have 65 alliances already created by reunion of universities based on interest, based on transnational cooperation, And we'll give you an example related to our alliance, to CIVIS Alliance, a little bit later. Now we are just opening the discussion. That's very important because all of them are centrally focused on traditional degrees, but embracing the new approaches for creating transnational degrees. And we are not talking about the European degrees, just branding a new one. Of course, embracing microcredentials as a dynamic way to address the evolving needs of learners and industries in the 21st century, which is very important because alliances are piloting a wide array of microcredentials, starting from short, focused courses on specific skills to comprehensive, stackable modules that can eventually lead to a larger qualification. What's truly exciting is the collaboration with diverse stakeholders. And I'm sure that also in the context of Latin American universities and higher education climate or environments, the situation it's more or less similar. Ensuring these micro-credentials are aligned with the complex needs of the society, because the societies are asking, in a way, the direction for creating and opening a new engagement for our universities. And that's a topic, a strategic topic for the future. Universities just in the near future are invited to broken the walls and to create something which in the European context, it's called universities without walls. Of course, symbolical walls of the universities in order to respond and to be engaged in the society's requirements and needs. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's a really inspiring model for the colleagues in the Latin American university, especially because you mentioned the diverse range of needs among the learners, of different kind of learners, non-traditional, traditional learners, but also the change in the industry sectors. I mean, we see now with the emerging of AI, for example, and the new industries developing around that, that clearly the learning needs are also changed. And I would presume then that of course, when you speak about the alliances and how they address, then it means that they have to be quite flexible in the way that they are thinking and designing those micro credentials, and not necessarily following a pattern, a common way, thinking that okay, since one alliance is doing micro credential this way, this is the way that micro credentials have to be developed, and the others are following. So, what would be your view a bit on this flexibility in terms of learning, and well, you mentioned the needs of the learners. Maybe there's also a change in how we think about learning in connection to micro credential.
That's a fantastic question. I think that this is a very broad perspective on answering to a specific request coming from the psychological field. They have, in a way, understood that sometimes the profile of learners has changed, and that's very important to recognize. That's the new way of reimagining or reinventing learning. In our country, in TEDx, we have very bravely, courageously speaking about the idea of learning and unlearning, the process which is opposite to learning, in order to stimulate, to create new spaces, new rooms for learning again. And that's very important because sometimes in our universities until now, we have been a little bit forgotten the idea of learning for our students. They have been replaced with shadowing working or doing something in a very practical way to implement, but we need some reflection time in very short approaches of learning. And sometimes in this context, we have um, how, how could we express? We need to look in a way to create a perspective of learning which is focused in some small area of learning. We are calling now micro learning, and this is not our invention. This is a topic in the psychology of learning, which is more or less very interesting and challenging perspective. But in the same time, we need to look very openly to a new modality to answer to specific questions or requests coming from the students, reprofiling. They are adapting after pandemic situation, the expectations of our students, the concentration, the focusing or their attention, and also the possibility to remake or rearrange learning has just boosting micro credentials in a very broader and larger way. Now, but that's very important to answer to a specific questions, and I'm sure that many people are just looking or imagining something fantastic on using micro credentials. You will see when you're just going to discuss example, and when Alexandra will being deeper involved in the presentation on the CIVIS experiences. Micro credentials are not meant to replace traditional degrees. That's very important to mention from the very beginning. Of course, micro-credentials will complement and enrich traditional degrees. They are offer learners more flexibilities and choice. Um, we are calling that arrangements, new arrangements of learning, different modules, small modules based on micro-learning could be arranged, could be create a new flexible perspective in order to accommodate something like a journey. If this is a metaphor, very nice for our students, that's fantastic to look to a possibility to follow a journey of our students, focusing on their specific needs and the skills. We're also seeing the trend towards modularization, small elements of curricula, which can be covered through micro-credentials, where the traditional degrees are being broken down into smaller, more manageable units that can be combined with micro-credentials or in micro-credentials in order to create tailored learning pathways. That's challenging and very, very nice, Alex.
I see that, and I think that for the colleagues in the training module on micro credential, we will also have to now consider sharing a couple of concepts and terminologies that definitely they have just experienced. Micro learning, clearly, it's probably a rediscovery, unlearning, and of course flexibilization of learning. So I'm sure we will also dive more into many others as we move further. But of course, I see that there is a clear connection between the learning experience of the students and how we redesign it through the micro credentials, and how, of course, universities of different kind, consortia of universities such as European University Alliances, but others as well, not only them, can indeed reshape this educational landscape. But also redefine a bit the concept of lifelong learning, because I'm sure that the colleagues here in the Latin American context are also looking a lot towards lifelong learning, not only to undergraduate students. So I would like to ask you, based, of course, on the expertise and the experience and what you have seen working with not only with our alliance, because you've worked with many others as well. Uh, what would you say are the benefits of alliances experiencing these micro credential initiative? What added value is it for alliances to actually test them and to work with them?
I like very much this word to test and to experiment something, because we in education we have been used in a way to avoid experimentation or testing or just making something to be outside of the frameworks coming from the traditional research. But we need to be in a way looking to some benefits which are truly transformative. And from this perspective, according to your question, Alex, our this is not a traditional question. We are reflecting each other on this topic. For learners, micro credentials offer a flexible and cost-effective way to have access to upskilling and reskilling. This is the voluntary orientation or focused on gaining recognition for special competencies that are high demands in this moment in according to the society's needs or requirement. This can be particularly beneficial for lifelong learners what want to stay ahead on this curve, but in the same time, it's asking or challenging universities to open their doors to the new audiences. I was mentioning previously non-traditional students. The people who are outside of universities in this moment, they have been qualified, certified by the universities with a degree, but in this moment, according to their professional needs, or continuing or ongoing processes, they need to just to take the way of upskilling or reskilling as a priority in their lives. This is fantastic new intervention of the universities because they could create or open a door for this category of students in relationship with various stakeholders. Why not an arrangements internally and outside of the universities, and foster a very nice culture of continuing education, even if you're just talking about the traditional European context or a very, how to say, challenging perspective in the Latin American perspective. And if I'm just allow here, we had experienced fantastic relationship with our colleagues in Latin America higher education environment. And we have been, me personally and Alex as well, we have been impressed by the high level of competences, by huge and deep engagement, and the curiosity of learning, using and transferring in the reality what's happening in the microcredentials context or priority or strategic approach. That's fantastic, and this is a huge advantage for the Latin American context. Yeah.
I would say then it's clear that it's something that can be regarded, I mean, a win-win from both the learner side and the universities. And without intending to quote a prime minister quite well prolific this period, offering a menu of educational opportunities from the universities aside towards the society. Now, I'm sure now because you mentioned about the specificities of Latin America also as a different, of course, higher education landscape compared to the European one, and then I think it'd be interesting to talk a bit more, if you agree, on what could be the way in which those case studies, because of course the colleagues in the training will look a bit at CIVIS case study, also other case studies, and of course they will question, okay, it looks nice, it's interesting, I can learn from it, maybe not, but how can I actually, take it home? How can I make the best use of it? What should I consider in this regard? So, what would be in your view, for example, if we consider this, the fact that, well, we talk about different social, economic, educational landscape in the Latin American context compared to the European one, what would you think are some key considerations that our colleagues from those higher education institutions should maybe keep in mind when they look at our case study, for example, and they look at civis and say, okay, how does it fit in my story? How does it fit in my world compared to the one presented there?
I like it very much, this challenge, Alex. That's an excellent question, because while the European context provides valuable inspiration, it's crucial also for the Latin American institutions to embrace the concept, and I'm starting to challenge here, of decontextualization and recontextualization. Uh, that's very interesting because sometimes when the would like to export, this is a completely unusual term in or concept in policies of education, would like very much to have transfer practices, transfer knowledge. That's but in this case, because it's about the context, the social context and educational context as well, embracing each other, because micro credentials is linked to social approaches, but in the same time with educational perspective as well. The relationship between contextualization, decontextualization, and recontextualization in another environment, that's very interesting, because this means that understanding the specific needs, values, and challenges of the region, which is required to be adapted. And this is fantastic because we have, in a way, created something which is called the European model. European model on European university alliances, European model which is linked to some cultural relevant and impactfully micro credentials perspective. Yeah, that's perfect. But in the same time, we need very carefully to look and to approach the perspective on the contextualization. In which way we can decontextualize a reality like as micro credentials in Europe and recontextualizing micro credentials. And we are very kindly asking the linguist to be, in a way, very comprehensive with our English sometimes concerning contextualization and recontextualization. But I am sure that the primary meaning, the primary sense of discussion has been well understood. Culturally, we have some important and educationally barriers we need to be crossed, and just goes directly to micro credentials, which will be recontextualized in the Latin America perspective. Yeah.
I mean, it's clear that, whenever we speak, even in Europe, about education, it's always a matter of, the national competence. It's always a matter of the region. It's always a matter of how, the values, the cultural, the social aspects, even in the smallest parts of Europe, shape education. So it's even more natural to speak that when we speak about two very different parts of our world, it's clear that there'll be context that influence the way we design and implement micro credentials and how we understand our learners, and how, as you said, we can transfer the models we see. Um, and would you think that in taking this into consideration, there are some specific differences that you would think important for our colleagues to consider when they look at our case study and they look at it and say, okay, maybe this is something I have to keep in mind when I learn from it, or maybe when I criticize it, when I'm trying to understand it and understand why it is like this and not like in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very another interesting perspective which is covered by the question. Cultures play a significant role in explaining how learners, because you are talking about the learners, the people who are going to learn, to have an experience, a pedagogical experience, an educational experience, a social experience, a cultural one, in which way they are going to perceive and to be engaged with educational offerings. And some example in some Latin American cultures, there might be a strong emphasizes on community-based learning, and sometimes preferences for in-person interactions are or could be in a way focused, but in the same time social factors like access to technology, the economic disparities also need to be carefully considered when designing and delivering micro credentials, because micro credentials could be part of academical offer as well. That's direct needs to reconsider traditional curricula, but in the same time we need to look to new ways or rearrange learning in order to readapt educational context, including existing curriculum frameworks for assessment practices, for other perspective concerning the certification. But all of them can influence how micro-credentials are integrated into the broader educational system, because we don't want to create a rupture. We don't want to create a gap. Our important mission as people, as ambassadors on behalf of micro credentials, dear Alexandru, is just to create the friendliest and the easiest way to make this transfer, this adaptation, which is mutually recognized and appreciated.
That's a very interesting perspective. I mean, it's nice to look at the community learning and how the community can adapt indeed to the needs, and maybe why not maybe advocate for the needs themselves. So thinking about it, because you mentioned, of course, this interpersonal learning, this social dimension, which is very important. Do you think there's also something that at institutional level, maybe the universities should consider when they compare, for example, the higher education institutions, now alliances at European level, and when they look back into their own context, the colleagues from the universities from Latin America, which are part of the training, and what maybe some lessons learned we learned back home, that maybe can create unique challenges for the colleagues here in the Latin American context.
Yeah, yeah. If you are referring to some lessons learned from Europe that can be applied, and perhaps just to, in a way, to have a win-win or a more win for our partners when they are going to design something new, which is of course based on micro-credentials philosophy. And if I may, I could recommend strongly to use micro-credentials more as a philosophy of reorganizing, recontextualizing, relearning, than to use micro-credentials as an instrument. And this could be another way, Alex, to discuss the differentiations between the philosophy or the tool. This is, if you are just going to use to consider micro-credentials as a tool, that's not enough, definitely. While both regions, Europe and Latin America, are sharing the same commitment to educational innovation, and that's definitely sure. And we have a lot of reflection coming from Latin America researchers' perspective in educational sciences. And I noticed one topic, which is innovative pedagogies, and that's fantastic. A contribution of Europe and the contribution of Latin America, it's more or less similar, and that's fantastic. If you're going to look to the European higher education landscape, which is often characterized by a stronger accent put on the research and the more established framework for the quality assurance, in Latin America, there might be a greater focus on practical skills development and workforce readiness, upskilling, and reskilling as processes which are additionally embracing and supporting the micro-credentials philosophy. However, both regions can learn from each other, and Europe's experiences in developing robust quality assurance mechanism and collaborating with industry can also be invaluable for Latin America. And also the experiences coming from Latin America and validating the practical experimentation in this field, especially for non-traditional students, could be very much and very deep welcomed in enriching the European context in this approach. Yeah, that's interesting.
Do you think we can consider maybe some potential challenges that we, again, from what we also stumbled across as we worked on, as we tried of also to explore this philosophy of micro credentials and to try, I mean, just even to try just to convince minds at some points in the short history of the experience. But do you think there are some potential challenges maybe that our colleagues might encounter as they embark on this micro-credential journey? Any, lessons again that they could learn and use them, to avoid reaching the same conclusions?
Um, Alex, if you are just looking to micro-credentials as a tool, sometimes, or as a program, or as a unit, or as a module, of course, then immediately we are just going to correlate this experience, which is formalized, with a certification. And for having this certification, we need to look something on the quality assurance, because we know that micro-credentials should be quality assured. That's a requirement. And we all, from this perspective, all providers would like to develop something which is more than traditional. And it's based on another way, which is creating a huge reform, a deep reform associated to what's happening in the area of quality assurance. And one initiative coming from INQAAHE, it's a crucial, an outstanding experience for creating a specific framework on the quality assurance and recognition, which are the key concerns to build trust and credibility in micro-credentials. Many people are just asking, okay, we'd like to attend micro-credentials, we'd like to participate, and finally, we will be certified. That's fantastic. But which credit we can just give or have or expect from the side of the final certification according to our specific career needs or career developments? This is why this experience requires clear learning outcomes, of course, robust assessment methods, and all the people. I remember very well the people participated to the previous training experience. All of them, they have been in a pressure in a way. It was not so psychological pressure. It was a normally learning pressure of being assessed very transparently, because the credentialing process is based on transparency. And another challenge which is associated with this one, it's ensuring the equitable access to micro-credentials for diverse learners, especially from the learners which are coming from the environment, marginalized or underrepresented communities. And that's very important to correlate the development of micro-credentials with some problem coming from the i- technological infrastructure and digital literacy, because both of them can create some barriers in some regions for giving or having access to real micro credentials or valued micro credentials. And if this experience of learning is becoming for our students the best one through micro learning and through micro credentials, learning, it's becoming or entering into the celebration process. I like it very much, this concept, and we like to inspire all the people who are just listening us, just to understood or understand micro credentials in a very active way as a celebration of learning. Even if you're talking about the European success and challenges shared with you, even if you're just going to talk about the Latin American institutions which are navigating, of course, to a very modern and effective perspective on this context.
It's interesting to think about the celebration as also a means to try to open up access to this celebration to more, and the idea of micro credential maybe also as a way to, you mentioned earlier about the walls of the universities, and a way to open up learning to those new kind of learning of learners all across there. And in this case, I would be very interested to know whether, when we look at equity and access in education and how different, contexts approach micro credentials and the use of these new flexible learning pathways. Now, if they can actually help, at least in our context, and maybe share this to the colleagues here, to help us leverage the reach of these underrepresented populations and bridge the skill gap and reach to those communities that you already mentioned that maybe need a bit of a higher attention towards their access to learning, access to the celebration you mentioned.
Do you remember, Alex, that last summer during the CIVIS, it's the name of our alliance, which is reunion of 11 universities, and they are. I will kindly ask Alex by returning to answer which I'm getting to put in your turn immediately concerning the civis. We have proposed a new concept. I'm assuming the whole process or non-inventing something special, but proposing a new term for reflection. We have used the concept of transclusivity, which is more than inclusivity. Inclusivity is just the process of giving access to education to all people who are motivated, who have the rights and who would like to attend higher education, to participate to higher education. All of them needs to have access, being granted to have access to education. That's fantastic. But this is not enough. We need to create something in our universities in order to offer to this category of students not only the chances for having access, but also to get them chances for success. It's a fantastic step forward, a fantastic shift from access to success. And this is the philosophy in which way micro credentials were just going to play an important role. If you are this was in CIVIS. This was our inspiration to call this process transclusivity. Beyond inclusivity, it's more than inclusivity. It's a perspective of reinventing our educational life through micro credentials. And of course, this was the CIVIS example. But if I'm just how to say call to or asked to just share other examples, there are inspiring examples. In Finland, for instance, micro-credentials are being used to upskill and reskill adult learners, including here immigrants and refugees, to enhance their employability and just try to create integration ways into the workforce. In Germany, micro-credentials are being integrated into vocational training programs. That's a traditional in Germany to have vocational education, the pedagogy of work. It's very much oriented and focused to the German society's needs as well, in order to provide learners with huge potential in micro-credentials and to democratize education. That's very important. If you'd like to create intense participation, large participation to higher education, we don't expect to have participations in the traditional degrees. Learning experiences in higher education, qualifying higher education for importance and interest to being asked or questioned by the society to offer inclusive pathways for all learners independently from their backgrounds. This is why micro-credentials could be a very good solution for creating equity and why not inclusive perspective, or more than inclusive perspective, but transclusivity as a new way for rebranding access to micro-credentials. Yes.
As you mentioned, of course, our alliance, and indeed, it's important maybe to use a couple of our discussion here to present it a bit also to the colleagues that will be watching us. They will be exploring more in the case study, of course, but it's interesting to look at indeed a cooperation between 11 European universities and 6 African universities, also showing a bit of even beyond European collaboration. That indeed, starting with 2019, have worked together to build a more joint venture in education, research, and societal challenges. And of course, one of the priorities in education being micro-credential development, even though, well, initially it was more challenging to approach micro-credentials due to cultural differences, due to different traditions of educational development across Europe, which, as in many places, brings many cultures in higher education, many different backgrounds, many different perceptions over what higher education actually means. But indeed, currently, of course, we are working a lot on also on micro-credential development. Aside the case studies, the colleagues will be reading about. We're also looking at other models, also for students, undergraduate, postgraduate students, but also for lifelong learners of different kinds. Even those that you have mentioned, Professor, those underrepresented communities like immigrants, other refugees, even from the war zones in different parts of the world, and many other more challenging learning populations that we are doing, we are facing currently over there.
Alex, if I may to add a point here, sometimes the people are asking the process of supporting financially the micro-credentials. Sometimes the people are making calculations related to the cost, in which way the balance between the cost and the benefits are accommodating the interest of students to go forward to achieve something significant in their lives. That's very important to put these questions when not only one question, but this is a constellation of questions, because it's about the efficacy of the efficiency as well of this kind of micro credentials. Sometimes seems to be a very cheaper academic offer because it's a small unit of learning. It's based on small purposes, focused on some learning experiences which are just following the micro learning perspective, and of course the assessment as well. It's certifying this kind of experience. The idea of cost benefit relationship should not be put in this calculation philosophy, because micro credentials is not necessarily just a certification. If the people are going to attend micro credential or to participate to a micro credentials just for having in mind its final process of certification, this is more or less for nothing. would like and we encourage very much the people who are dealing with micro-credentials to reflect on opportunity to add some specific pedagogies, training methods, methodologies of teaching, completely innovative, completely new. And this is, we call this perspective as innovative pedagogies, this constellation of methodologies and tools used for being adapted to micro-credentials. That's very important because we would like to create learning experiences for all people who are attending micro-credentials, memorable learning experiences, which are creating a real celebration. This is the connection, Alexandru, between the micro-credentials as a philosophy, micro-credentials as a celebration, and what is expecting from the future to be, in a way, pilot or experimented or tested in a context, and then because it's a new policy of education being implemented, and that's fantastic. And it's a very nice discussion between the perspective of cost benefit, but in the same time, the benefit will not be in a financial approach. It's more beyond that. It's in learning experiences. It's in what's happening with personal expectations and the people who would like to have deeper experiences memorable for their lives. Yeah.
And I would dare to add also for if we think about because I'm thinking of the colleagues working a bit also on the strategic dimension of how you actually consider those micro credentials and all the developments for your university. Then it will be interesting also to scale it up to the university governance and how you consider the transformation at different levels and multiple levels of the institutions themselves and how you think at it strategically and they work on a strategy to develop micro credentials more than again only the tool or only the learning opportunity. And therefore I would be interesting to ask. I mean, you have a lot of experience also in university governance for more than 20 years, and it would be interesting to think of how would you see, if you would think about transforming the university governance and looking at micro credentials from a strategic point of view for your own institution, what would you think are potentially the main ideas that maybe the colleagues should think about when thinking about changing the strategy of their own institutions and looking at micro-credential, understanding all those benefits, thinking about the learner, thinking beyond the money, which you mentioned, which sometimes for university governance is not always easy for different reasons. Um, and what would you share? Some ideas, maybe as potentially we're also approaching a bit at the end of this video. What would be some positive notes from experience in the governance of a higher education institution to those colleagues who are currently most of them for sure in the same position of thinking for their own institutions on how they could actually leverage this internally.
Yeah. That's a question which is putting me in the real life of reflecting on some realities concerning the leadership in our universities. If you are just going to refer to what's happening in the European academic tradition of universities, little bit oriented in that histories in higher education in Europe, in European continent, was based in traditional perspective of university, which is research intensive universities, and many people are just keeping in the special pocket of a rector or for a president of the university, the idea that university should be focused on research 100%. If research is missing, then the university it's missing the important role. But the reality is, dear colleagues and Alex and the people who are just listening to us, all you are aware that sometimes the leadership at the level university has been real challenged by what's happening in the real life, what's happening in the global context, what's happening in our societies. And this is why university should not be only enough being focused in research. It's one important scientific strategical objective or purpose for university or mission. It's a real mission to do research and to create research, to create innovative space in for the society. That's a mission of the university, 100%. But in the same time, the reality, which is challenging our society, our cultural and educational environment are putting university in a very specific and very sensitive decision. And I'm just recalling you what I was previously saying related to a nice policy paper provided by the European University Association called Universities Without Walls. This was because we are just, and the author of the report, European University Association, and experts coordinated by Michael Murphy, they wanted very much to stress, to emphasize the role of the university, which is looking to the society. It's just returning to the society what society has been granted previously to our university. And that's fantastic because micro-credentials could be an important point for being transferred back to the society. And this is why the process of recalling, reappealing, and of course, rethinking academic leadership is very important. I would like to appreciate very much the initiative coming from the Latin American partners, colleagues, and friends to have this kind of process of training, of educating, and of course, reshaping the minds of the people who are managing educational aspects, research, education, community engagement of your university. That's fantastic. Even if they are based on traditional or non-traditional perspectives, education, research, and society, or if you are just giving equal importance to all of the three strategic purposes or missions of the university, to have research intensive, to have educationally oriented, and to have societies oriented perspective. But both of them, education and society, could be approached jointly through micro-credentials. That's a fantastic and a very powerful instrument for a leadership team which like to create another perspective, a different one, focusing on the celebration.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's clearly interesting also to think about the connections between, you mentioned research, you mentioned, of course, the traditional research. I would dare to think, maybe we can even think about research-based micro-credentials or uh, micro-credential-based research at the end of the day, but maybe for another time. Now,
Yeah,
but
Alex,
also to think,
because the researcher and the learners, both of them are so important. Micro credentials is celebrating the learners and the learning as well. Research, celebrating researchers, and of course, research-oriented education. And both of them could be accommodated strategically, but not necessarily or not uniquely strategically. That's so important, and this is would like to keep or to take for further reflections on board. Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure, as I said a bit earlier, that after this this video and the discussion, is that clearly the colleagues will need a bit of a repertoire of new concepts to work with, to play with, maybe to think about some of them in the development. So I'm just retaking a bit the idea of micro learning, of unlearning, relearning, the flexible learning pathways, flexible learning arrangements. Just to summarize a bit the concepts that maybe they need to think about even when they work on their strategy, when they work a bit on their when they analyze the case studies, to think about how learn-based micro-credential access, transclusivity, inclusivity, all those concepts that maybe invite to rethink a bit micro credentials, as you said, beyond the tool towards the philosophy, beyond just the certification towards the learning, beyond maybe the teachers towards the learner and the student, and probably also more towards the society. And maybe if that would be suitable, maybe as to conclude a bit on a positive note, how do you see the future of microcredential and the relationship with higher education institutions, higher education as a whole? Maybe a bit also the connection with the transnational collaboration. You mentioned academic diplomacy, and how can we see the future of microcredential in those contexts? Latin America, Europe, higher education as a whole, and maybe where is the road leading us, if we look at it?
Yes, Alex. The future of education is the flexibility, the customization, personalization, and being skills oriented. And all of the three features are reunified in the micro-credentials philosophy. This is why I truly believe that micro-credentials are in this moment a key part of this transformation, which is going to offer a new pathways for learning, and why not career development, career advancement, which is increasing the motivation of the people. Then let's work together to build a more inclusive or transclusive, as I called previously this perspective, um, because I'm fully confident that Latin America educational perspective offered by wonderful minds coming and from this area, coming to Europe and developing something special, has the potential to become a global leader in micro-credentials innovation. Latin America universities will play an important role, not necessarily only for the continent, Latin American continent, but in the same time, I'm sure that we are going to create something, Alex, and the people who are listening to us, transcontinental alliances. This could be a fantastic move forward. And I personally look forward to seeing this very transformative perspective of creating an innovative way for having transcontinental arrangements based on micro-credentials philosophy. This is something like a late statement, not the last one perhaps, but a very nice and metaphorical one.
So I guess now they know how to look at our alliance and what's in there. Why are we there? Why are we working in this way? What are the topics that we are currently and recurrently drawing upon? And well, closing on with this idea of a transcontinental alliance, transcontinental education. Uh, Definitely challenging, of course, the minds of the colleagues. Thank you, Professor, for the dialogue, the exchange on this. I'm sure, and I hope it will be quite interesting for the colleagues as well.
Thank you very much, Alexandra, for this wonderful discussion, very rich, and I'm sure that we should be also very grateful to our colleagues, Latin American colleagues. They have granted us with a lot of trust, and we will be very gratefully to answering back with the same, not necessarily and uniquely diplomacy, but it's fantastic to turning back with diplomacy, which is recreating, why not, a future huge arrangements on transnational, transcontinental alliances.